Oh, hello. Sorry, you caught me reading. I was reading this book, Wrapped for Eternity, and this is a book that I've had for a long time. When I was an 11th grade world history teacher, I would integrate different, we called them trade books. I would integrate different books into my classroom so that I could give my students more than what they were getting from me and from the textbook. I wanted my students to know more than just the people, the names of the people, the names of places, and major events that took place on a timeline. I wanted them to know more about the culture, about some specialized vocabulary that went along with the study of Egypt. And to be honest, it was interesting to 11th graders to know the process of making a mummy. And this little book went through the whole process. And it was interesting to my students, much more interesting than filling out a map or answering questions at the end of a chapter. So I integrated literacy in my world history classroom. And why did I do that? Well, let me tell you why. It's because I had a firm belief that every teacher should be a reading teacher. And that is because reading is a fundamental skill that underpins all learning. Literacy, it is the gateway to understanding complex concepts across all subjects. Integrated content area reading lesson plans, which is the place to start, are essential because they ensure that students are not only reading but also engaging with and responding to texts that are relevant to their subject matter. So that is the key, and that is the topic of this lesson today. We are going to talk about how to write an integrated lesson plan. The template that you will use to write this integrated lesson plan is the MGA Standardized Lesson Plan Template. So let's kind of go through every stop, and I will just briefly touch on every stop on this lesson plan. You, of course, are going to put your information at the top there. You are going to use check marks for the classroom seating. Is this a general ed class, or is this an inclusion classroom? Are you going to be working with students only whole group? Are you going to use whole group and then maybe break them into some small groups? Or is this going to be more of a one-on-one? And so you can check which lines there apply to this lesson. The next is the standards. Now, I know that the Georgia Department of Education is undergoing quite a change with their standards right now. So I have GSE standards here. In an integrated lesson plan, remember that you need at least 2 standards. You need to have your content standard that you are, the content, whatever content area you are teaching, and then you need to have another standard that addresses a specific reading skill. And it needs to be specific. And I will tell you that that in some of the standards, Georgia has begun to add some indicators that address literacy within the body of standards in different content areas, but not all. And you might not be able to find the specific standard that you are looking for, the reading skill that you want to reinforce in your lesson plan. But you do have to have 2 standards here. So you need your content standard, and then you need a literacy standard that is going to also be addressed in this lesson. So Put your standards there. Now, let me also tell you, do not just put the abbreviated numbers that go along with the standard. Be sure and put the entire text of the standard that you are addressing in this lesson plan. Your professors at MGA are good, but they're not that good. We have not memorized every standard according to the numeration. So we need to see the language of the standards so that we can match that up with your objectives and what you're teaching. All right, so the next part is the target I can statements. And this is, what can the student communicate about their learning at the end of this lesson? That is a basic I can statement, came from the Common Core. And it's a good idea. And a lot of districts require that you have these I can statements posted somewhere in the room. And I think that's a great idea because you can keep referring to this as you are teaching to make sure that your students can demonstrate to you that they have the knowledge and skills to be able to self-evaluate that they can do that by the end of this lesson or the unit. All right, the next stop is the goal. You see that right there under the GSE standards. And remember that a goal is a big, broad statement of what is to be learned or the skill that is to be demonstrated after the lesson. It's not as narrowed and specific as an objective, but it's a broader written statement of what the expectation is. The next is your objective. We sometimes call this the success criteria. And for it to be a successful criteria statement, it has to be measurable. So remember that when you write your learning objectives, and let me go back, you have 2 standards. You must have 2 learning objectives. You have your content objective and you have your literacy or reading objective. So every lesson plan in an integrated lesson plan must have 2. So make sure that you are that you have 2 that are here, and make sure also that you follow the formula for writing your objectives. Make sure that you have the audience, the behavior with the content, the condition, and the degree of proficiency to make sure that they are measurable. All right, so the next stop is assessments. It says, how will you know that students know and can do what you expect, and that it also meets the intent of the standard? All right, so you have 2 places to answer this question. You have number 1, the learning objective target from the Georgia Standard of Excellence. And so what is it from the learning objective that students are going to do? You're kind of rewriting it here, and you're going to focus. If you are saying that they are on a quiz at the end of the lesson, if you have a little, a 4-question quiz, a 5-question quiz, well, then that is what you're going to talk about here because it comes from the learning objective. The other one is the type. Formative and summative. Okay, so on a single lesson plan, you most likely will only have formative assessments. And remember, the definition of a formative assessment is an assessment that is ongoing throughout instruction, and it helps the teacher to know, and many times like that, if students are getting it, or if they need more information, more practice. Do you need to scaffold? Do you need to reteach as needed? And so you're going to write about that there. So what are all your formative strategies that you plan to use in a lesson? Well, I sure hope you're going to use question and answer. I hope you're going to use a lot of proximity and discussion. You're going to walk around the room. You're going to observe what students are doing. You're going to scaffold. You're going to reteach as needed. All of these things that you're going to do during the formative stage. Maybe you're going to use whiteboards, and the students are going to hold up boards to show their answer. If you're doing math problems, maybe you're going to use whiteboards. So all of that information should go there where it says formative. You're going to write and describe there. All right, so on this screen, we just got through talking about assessments. And so I wanted to show you this objective that is written to follow the audience, behavior, the condition, and the degree of proficiency. And I'm going to read it, and as I'm reading it, this is a think task. So I would always give my students think tasks, especially if I was going to show a short, maybe a clip of a video. I would give them a think task before I started the video so that they knew that after they watched the video, they were going to have to answer a question. So, or maybe I would give them a think task as we were, when I taught elementary, when we were heading to related arts. I would give them a think task. I want you to think about this. What are the 3 top items you would take in your Conestoga wagon if you were on the Oregon Trail? So I would give my students think tasks because I tried to focus their attention and give them something that I wanted them to focus their brain on as we were doing something. So I'm going to read this to you out loud, and here's your think task. As I'm reading, I want you in your mind to think, okay, there's the audience, there's the behavior with the content, there's the condition, and there's the degree of proficiency. So I want you to complete this think task as I'm reading through this objective. Given a Fahrenheit thermometer and a clipboard with a recording sheet, the student will be able to accurately record the temperature in 3 varied outdoor locations and then convert the recorded temperatures to Celsius with 100% accuracy. All right, so hopefully you were thinking and you were in your mind saying which one is which part. So the audience is the student will, and the behavior is they're going to record and they're going to convert using the thermometer outdoor. The condition is they're going to record this on the recording sheet and then convert, and the degree of proficiency is 100% accuracy. All right, so going back to what we just talked about with the assessments, the assessment part that deals with the objective, then you would write about the recording sheet that the students will go outside. They'll have the 3 different locations and they will write it on the sheet and then they will convert it. So this is the assessment that you would use according to the objective. The other part where I talk to you about all of your formative assessments, and you wouldn't have a summative unless it was the last day of maybe a unit and you're going to give the unit test. Or maybe a chapter test. But that would be a summative assessment. But mainly you're going to live more in the formative assessments. So then all of these other formative assessments that you would list would be how you were teaching the students how to use the thermometer, how you were modeling to students how to convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius, all of these things. Maybe you're having the students do some on their own, some practice problems before you sent them out. You would use proximity. You would walk around and observe how students are completing the problems at their desk as they're working through, and you are stopping. Maybe you're asking the students some questions. And this is some of my favorite teaching, is when I'm with my students and I can stop and I can look at them and I can actually hear them right there. Look at them and then give them some assistance. Maybe I just needed a little scaffold to help them. Maybe I needed to reteach right there at the point of need. So all of these types of ways that you're assessing, and then you're going to address, of course, based on your assessment, student need. So this is what an objective should look like, and this is how you would then use this on the form for the assessments, on the lesson plan. All right, in our diverse classrooms, we know that there are students who have different special needs that we are going to address and make sure that we're meeting their needs in the classroom. And so we have some different types of students that you might have in your classroom that you are going to address through some form of accommodation. And the first there, it says students with IEPs. Are you going to address any of those? Students who are English language learners, which means that English is not their first language. Are there any other types of behaviors that might need some accommodation or support? And this could be, students who have an EIP or any other sort of behavioral plan. Maybe there's some students that are struggling students that are low achieving that you might work with as maybe as a group and give them some extra scaffolds and some assistance. And then of course there is the academically advanced students. Sometimes these are your gifted, sometimes these are your students that have not been identified as gifted, but in maybe your particular subject area, they do need some extra support to ensure that you're meeting their needs. And let me just say this right now. Meeting the needs of academically advanced does not give them just more of the same. Oh, you finished these 10 problems, well, here's 10 more you can do. That is not meeting their academic needs, just giving them more of the same. Make sure that you, and I used to do this a lot. I remember I was teaching third grade and I had a student named Aaron, and he was way smarter than his teacher. And so he would finish up so quickly. And so I got out an old algebra book and I started giving him problems where he would solve for X, and then I would add X and Y variables. And this was third grade, so this is at 8. He turned 9, I think, that fall. And so he was being challenged in my classroom in math to do more than just doing more of the same problems. He was given an activity that really challenged him. So think about those things. It doesn't have to be a big elaborate plan that you create every lesson, but always have something that a way that you know that you can go to make sure you're meeting their needs. All right, after you do that, if you look down below, you will see that there is a way to organize the information on students who are going to need the accommodations, and that you can write that in on this lesson plan. So for an IEP student, you need to write their initials, and then you're going to write how you're going to accommodate. Now, I know that on many lesson plans, as a teacher, the accommodations will repeat. For instance, if a child has an IEP and part of their IEP is that they will be given extended time on assessments, then that is on every written assessment. They're going to have a little extra time. So that would be the accommodation that you would write. But make sure that if it is a student who has an IEP, or if it's a 504, which is not covered under special education, that is an accommodation that is just served in regular education. And many times 504s are more with how you need to address some sort of a physical situation. So be sure and put the initials there and how you're going to meet that need. And so not only then does the lesson plan demonstrate that you are being attentive to the needs of these students that have these special situations, but it also becomes a legal a document that you can use if there was ever a question whether or not you were meeting the needs of these students. So you would do that there. Now, if it is if it's for a group of students, let's say you have a group of, I taught in Texas, I always had a group of ELLs. So for my ELLs, it would be a group of ELLs, and I would then write for how I'm going to meet their needs. And so, for instance, I used to have, one year I had, I think it was 3 different young men who were in my class, and the ELL teacher, instead of pulling them out, we got together and we decided it would be better for them to stay in the classroom and for this teacher, this ELL teacher, to stay with them and give them the support that they needed and not miss out on the instruction. And that worked beautifully. They just grew leaps and bounds. And we worked this out because it worked best for the student. So you can address on these lines, and you can add more lines there. This is, of course, a Word document. And write then your accommodations there. The next are the materials to gather prior to the lesson, and then the materials that you need to create prior to the lesson, like if you create a PowerPoint or Canva, or you're doing a Quizlet stack, or you're making a Kahoot or whatever, then those things need to be done before the lesson. The other things are things that you gather prior to the lesson, that, like manipulatives if you're teaching a math class and you need those things. Then you can just make lists for each of these 2 stops. Vocabulary and definitions, that's our next stop, and you'll see that there's 3 different stops here, and I wanted to make sure that you understand that this does not mean that do not think that this is your reading instruction here. This is the vocabulary and definitions for this lesson that your students need to know. And let me just add here that if there is some academic vocabulary that the students might need to know, depending upon what you're teaching and how you're teaching, then you could add that here also. But you need to, on every lesson plan, make sure that you have at least 2 or 3 vocabulary words and their definitions to write here. The next stop is student-friendly, kid-friendly definitions. Ways to explain it, maybe to break it down, depending upon the developmental level of your students and the age of your students, to make it to where they can more easily understand. And then where will vocabulary be addressed in the lesson? Well, usually vocabulary is addressed maybe right at the beginning of the lesson. And then, so you're going to write about this, address at the very beginning, maybe introduce the vocabulary, but then it should be reinforced throughout the lesson, and maybe even on the final assessment. But this is not your science of reading integration. This is where you are just making sure that in every lesson you're reinforcing the relevant vocabulary needed for the student to have success in that lesson. And now we're down to the fun part. This is your actual teaching. So this is, if you see this section that starts here with The first part on the left says the estimated time to complete each section. This should help you with time management, if you can imagine how long it's going to take you. And let me just say this. It usually takes longer than you think to do something, to teach a lesson, to do one part of a lesson, because we are teaching students, and students are unpredictable. And sometimes we think in our heads, well, they have all this prior knowledge and they should be able to hit the floor running. And you start teaching, and even though you taught them something yesterday, they demonstrate to you that they don't know what they learned yesterday. So you have to go back, you have to take a step back and teach and reteach, get them back up and going so that you can move forward. That happens a lot. And sometimes we wonder, why did they not have it in their brains immediately that they remembered that we covered this yesterday? Well, because kids have a lot going on in their heads, and sometimes it's not anchored. It's not anchored learning, and so you need to give them a scaffold and give it to them again so that you're drawing that from their schema back into the place where you can then begin to build on that. So I know it's frustrating, teachers, but just remember, we've all been there. In fact, some of us are still there, and we need a little assistance in moving forward. All right, so you're going to write your time for each section, and then if you move over there, you see that it's this section must be expanded with specific details and logically sequenced instruction. You need to indicate what you will do for each of your steps. And so there's just like 3 steps in this first box. That's only to demonstrate to you what needs to go there. You will have many more than 3 steps, because you are going to write out exactly how you're going to teach this lesson and what you're going to do in each spot. So the first thing is your activator of prior knowledge. This should be something that's quick. It should be no more than 2 to 3 minutes. So do not think you're going to show a 5-minute video and then do an activity and that's your activator. That's part of your lesson. You need to have something that's engaging. Maybe I know when I taught high school, I might have something like maybe a little provocative political cartoon that I would have on the board, and students would come in and sit down and look at that and try to figure out what it means. And so whatever you do, it needs to be something that is quickly completed and can activate what they've been learning to pull them into for you to build on that schema in today's lesson. All right, and then it says the I can statements or EQs. So what is it that you're addressing? You've already done this up at the top, so you're just copying and pasting it back here. Depending upon what your school district does. If your school district does I cans, then write I can statements. If your school district prefers that you write essential questions, well then put your essential questions here. So it's I can or EQs. And then you're going to start writing the steps to your direct instruction. So remember, our lesson plan is divided into these 3 parts for direct instruction. There is the I do, and this is where the teacher is teaching and modeling the knowledge and skills that are found in the standard, and you're using whatever strategies that you have researched and can support your instruction at this point of the lesson plan. So you're going to go through the steps there of what you are teaching for your direct instruction. This is all about you, the teacher. You are the exemplar, and you're sharing with your students information, the content, and or the skills that they're going to need to be successful in this lesson. The next part is the exploration and development, and this is what we call the we do. This is guided practice. In guided practice, you can come back and forth with direct instruction and guided practice depending upon how successful your students are at this point in the lesson. So if you're teaching and you're teaching your students and you're modeling to them what they're supposed to do, and then you might put them in groups to work on something. You might have them do it with just a paired, with just another person. Maybe you've got them working individually at their desks, but whatever that is, you're still guiding them. You are using your body, you're using proximity. And let me just say here that this is also important. When you put students into guided practice, remember that it is guided, that you need to be out there with them. This isn't the time for you to quickly grade some papers or answer an email to your principal, even though I know we're always tempted to do that. But I'm going to tell you, this is a very important part of your lesson. You're walking around, you're observing what your students are doing at their desks or within their groups. You're stopping, you're talking to them, you're asking them questions, you're reteaching as needed. And if you need to call the class all back together, if everyone's a little lost, then don't hesitate, teachers, to stop everything, go back to the board and say, okay, let me hit this one more time and make sure that we've all got it, and then we'll try it again. And so do that if needed. But if not, if you can just address them in small groups or individually as you're walking around, then you're going to do that. So that is the exploration and development part. Again, you have steps you need to describe completely in logical steps, not a long narrative, but in logical steps, what's going on at this time. The next part is the lesson conclusion. All right, so we had the first part, which is the I do, and that is the teacher presentation. That's you teaching and modeling. The second part is the we do, which is the guided practice, putting the students to work, seeing if they've got it. The third part is what we call the conclusion. And this is where you bring all the students back together. Maybe you're going to hit it again, go back over the big ideas. And here's something, teachers. Never tell students what they learned today. I've heard teachers say this. Okay, well, today we learned. Ask students what they learned. Somebody tell me, and then have them tell you what they learned. So don't talk at kids and tell them what they've learned, because I can remember being a student and a teacher telling me what I learned, and I think, I don't think I learned that. But the teacher's impression was that we all learned this. So ask the students what they've learned. Go back over any big ideas, and then you're going to do the you do, which is the third part of the lesson, and that's independent practice. And let me tell you, the independent practice comes directly from your learning objectives. Whatever you wrote as the condition in your learning objective comes in at this point in your lesson. So if you wrote on a quiz, or if you wrote on a graphic organizer, or if you wrote using a seesaw activity on the computer, or whatever you use, a ticket out the door, whatever you used whatever you wrote in your learning objective, this is where it shows up, because this is how you're going to tell, according to your degree of proficiency, whether or not the students have learned. And let me tell you something else that's powerful. It tells you whether or not you have taught well. And it's so encouraging when you have you have data to back up that you have taught well. You can pat yourself on the back, da 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 da. I can teach. It's the best feeling in the world, teachers. So this is where this comes in, that condition. This is your final assessment right here in this part of the lesson plan. Well, we are at the final two stops of this lesson plan template. The first one says assessment of mastery. All right. So how will you determine whether students have mastered the learning objectives, and list specific assessments and the learning objectives with which they are associated? All right, so you're going to answer these questions. How are you going to determine whether students have mastered the learning objectives? What are you going to talk about here? That's right, you're going to talk about the objectives that you wrote and the assessment that you created and the conclusions that you can draw based on the results of students completing that final assessment. So you're going to also list some specific assessments and the learning objectives that they are associated with. All right, so you're going to list here what it is. Did you create a quiz? Did you create an exit ticket? All that information needs to go here, right here, how they are going to be assessed for mastery. And let me also say that I require my students to attach their assessments to the lesson plan. So whatever you're using for assessments, not just the final assessments, but also any other assessments that are used, maybe for guided practice, whatever you're using throughout instruction, those need to be attached. I have my students attach their assessments to the lesson plan template. All right, and then the final stop. I know you're going, yay, we're at the final stop. Assessment uses. What actions will you take in response to the rates of mastery you determine? All right, so you would then have to write about the number of students in your class. If you have a class of 25 students and you have, what is your rate of mastery that you would determine would prepare you, would not prepare you, but would inform you that your students, enough of your students have demonstrated understanding so that you can press on, but you know that the students who did not demonstrate proficiency or mastery, that you would have to look for opportunities to work with them in a small group. So you're going to write about this. You're going to describe your next steps for instruction based upon your assessment of student learning. So this will, of course, be a narrative that you're going to write describing this part of your planning. You're thinking about, okay, with my students, with this group of students, what am I going to say is my rate of mastery? And what does that really mean to me as a teacher moving forward? At this point, let's start talking about the importance of integrating the reading skills into a lesson plan. So we've gone through every stop on the lesson plan, and now we're going to talk about how to write explicit instruction to meet the needs of your students through the marrying of content with the reading, the literacy. So you have to marry the two together. Now, this does not mean, I've heard this from many of my secondary students who say, I'm a math teacher. I've not been trained to be a literacy teacher. And I understand that. But that doesn't mean that you do not have knowledge about vocabulary and about teaching students to engage with text in your content area, and that you cannot look for resources to assist you in extending their understanding through text in whatever content area you are teaching. So the idea is that you need to start with the standards, and once you've picked your standards and decided what literacy skill you're going to reinforce in this lesson, then I encourage you to get out there and start researching what other good math teachers do in the classroom to integrate that specific skill in their content area classroom. And let me say this also, because I know a lot of times if you're an ELA teacher, you say, well, I am an ELA teacher. Well, that's true. You are an ELA teacher, but that doesn't mean that in every grammar lesson or literature lesson that you're not addressing a specific reading skill. So you still have to focus in on a specific reading skill to reinforce in whatever lesson it is that you're preparing for in using this lesson plan. Because every teacher is a reading teacher. Even the ELA teachers are reading teachers. All right, so we're going to do this step by step. First step is you're going to look at the standards. Now, I have a couple of standards here. I picked out 6th grade standards for social studies, and the social studies standards deals with the political and physical attributes of countries in South America, different features of geography, and so that's what we're going to focus on for this. When I'm looking at the social studies Georgia Standards of Excellence, I found, they have also added some literacy in this particular. Remember I said before that you might find that the GSE has already added some literacy in. And I know that in my integrated lesson plan, I have to have 2 standards. So I picked my first one dealing with South America, and then my second one is going to deal with determining the meaning of words and phrases. All right. So I found my 2 standards and I put those on my lesson plan, and I would start building once I put them on there, I would do backward design, and I would just immediately start looking at what I'm going to use to assess my students in this particular lesson, making sure that I am giving my students an opportunity not only to demonstrate understanding of the geography I'm teaching my students about South America, but also to demonstrate that they have the skill within a body of text to show me that they can use the strategy that I've taught them to uncover information about the meaning of words. Okay? So I needed to figure out what I wanted my students to do and what my final assessment was going to be. My final assessment is always found in my learning objective in the C part of the learning objective. That is the condition. Under what condition will students be able to demonstrate their knowledge and skills? Okay? All right. So I have 2 learning objectives for an integrated plan. I have 2 standards, so I have to have 2 learning objectives. The first one says that the student will be able to identify the location of the Andes mountain chain and the 7 countries that it passes through with 75% accuracy on a final quiz map. Okay. The next one, the student will be able to determine the definition of unknown South American geography vocabulary words in context using context clues on a final quiz with 85% accuracy. Okay, so on my final quiz, I know that I'm going to have 2 parts. I'm going to have a map, and I'm going to have a section that is text where students are going to demonstrate the strategy that I'm teaching them to uncover word meanings using context clues. All right. So the strategy that I'm teaching my students, I'm reinforcing vocabulary, the meaning of words, that's vocabulary. And so I'm just for demonstration purposes here. And also let me say that when you're integrating in your content area, you're not going to teach the whole lesson on a reading skill. But you should probably have a plan to have 10 to 15 minutes of instruction that is just focused in on literacy. And it could maybe be 20 minutes. It depends on how long your class period is. But you would probably want it to be not more than half of the class, of the class time, focused in on literacy. Because you still have content standards that you have to meet. So we are not just layering on top, but we are integrating throughout so that the skills that you're giving them through whatever strategy you teach them is going to help them in their overall understanding of the knowledge that they need from your standard that you're teaching. So the content knowledge that they need, it's going to help support. It's not just an overlay, it's part of the lesson. So I just picked out a few context clues that could be used in text to help students to use the text and their background knowledge. That's always important. Students, we tell our students, bring in that background knowledge that you have when you read a word, because sometimes students have more understanding of what they would say is an unknown word than what they think. Maybe they've just heard it in a different context. Maybe it's a multiple meaning word and they are thinking of it in a different way than the way it's being used in this piece of text. All right, so here's some context clues that I would use. I would have them read around the word. I tell my students read the sentence before, read the sentence after. So read around the word to see if that will give you some information to help you with that unknown word. I tell them to look for commas, that a lot of times the definition is actually present in the sentence. It's just separated by commas. In the same way, some writers of text use commas and also give us some wonderful signal words. And these are some of the signal words I tell my students to look for. The word called, the word or, the words such as. These types of signal words can help us to uncover the meaning of an unknown word. And of course, I tell them, look for synonyms and antonyms. Look for the word like, or, something that will help them to understand that unknown word. It may be present in the form of an antonym or a synonym within the body of the text. So let's pretend that I'm teaching my lesson. I am teaching a lesson on South American geography. And I am teaching specifically the geography of the western edge of South America, where the Andes Mountains are located. And we're going through the 7 different countries that the Andes Mountains goes through. So that's my big lesson. That's my big content for this lesson. But there's also a lot of language that goes along with understanding that part of the geography of South America. And so I've done my direct instruction. I have modeled to students, and I've given them these strategies, and I've used different ways of teaching students how to recognize using their context clues, such as I might use examples like the mountain climber climbed to the summit, comma, the top of the mountain, comma, to make base camp. So what does the word summit means? It means the top of the mountain. So I would give them lots of examples. I would model to them how to use the text itself to help uncover meaning of unknown words. And so now I might put them in groups and for their guided practice, and I might give them a paragraph like this, and they would have to do 2 things. They would have to write down what they think the word means based on their prior knowledge or based on using one of the context clues, and and then they would have to write down which one of the context clues that we learned about today helped them uncover that meaning of that word. So they are demonstrating actually 2 skills. Number 1, the skill of using the text to define an unknown word. And number 2, they are recognizing the strategy that they themselves used to help unpack the meaning of that word. So here's an example. The Andes are part of the Cordilleras, or long chains of parallel mountain ranges that stretch along the western edge of South America. So the first word they would have on their worksheet, they're working with their group, is the word Cordilleras. And so I would have that word, and then they would have to write down, what does that word mean? Well, of course, I'm hoping that they write that it means that it's a long chain of parallel mountain ranges. And hopefully on the part of the worksheet that says, which context clue did you use? Well, they could have written down commas and the word or. So hopefully they are recognizing that they got a couple of clues here to help them figure out what that word means. So you could read through the rest of this paragraph. You can see there's several different context clues that are used throughout this paragraph to help students recognize some unknown words, hopefully learn some new words, and also for them to put a little muscle strength behind their ability to use the text itself to help them uncover meaning of unknown vocabulary. So we are at the end of the lesson, and so I'm going to go back over my students. I'm going to kind of give a wrap up and go back over what we've learned. I probably would have a map pulled up. I would go back over the 7 countries in the western part of South America. We would talk a little bit about the Andes Mountains. We would talk about those words that we learned in our guided practice, and then I would have the students go to work on their independent practice. And remember, we write our objectives to a singular student. We never say students will. We say the student will. And that's important because we don't assess our students for proficiency based on a group, because we all know that in every class there are the hand raisers, the ones who always have the right answer and always want to be called on. And so you cannot measure proficiency for every student based on only asking 2 or 3 students to answer questions. You must be able to measure student proficiency independently. So that's why our learning objectives are written to an individual student. So if you'll notice at the top of the screen here, I have a final assessment there, and then I have my learning objectives again. That's right, because remember I said at the beginning, the condition in your learning objective must show up again in the final assessment. So if you look right here, you'll see that I have created a mapping activity is on the front page, and on the back page, what did I give my students? I gave my students another opportunity to use a piece of text and their context clues to figure out unknown words. And so this would be my final assessment for this lesson. So at this point then, hopefully my students have met the degree of proficiency. And when they've met the degree of proficiency, if all of my students did, I would feel, or even if most of my students did, I would feel so validated in my teaching that my students came away with understanding and with some new skills that will transcend my social studies class or my math class or my science class or my business ed class or my health class. It will transcend my class into other classes in different content areas because I've given them some important skills that they can use. So remember, the big takeaways from writing an integrated plan is that you are not just layering some reading on your regular lesson, but you're actually teaching students an important skill and giving them an opportunity. And remember that you have to use text to give them an opportunity to demonstrate that they have proficiency in that skill, that strategy that you taught them, to demonstrate proficiency in the skill of uncovering the unknown words, the meaning of words. All right, so I hope this helps. I hope that you all are not overwhelmed by the lesson plan. Teachers who plan well teach well. And many a principal will tell you the teachers who plan well and plan really active strategies while they're teaching have the least number of office referrals and behavior issues in the classroom. Keep those students moving. Give them lots of opportunities to practice and to communicate what they've learned. And I know that they will come away with some amazing knowledge and skills that you have taught them.